Boom. We are live, ladies and gentlemen. I'm excited to bring you a podcast guest of your guys' choosing. I always like to do this. Brings me information that you guys have gone through the effort of bringing back that is so valuable to you and also now valuable to me. Michael Brody-Waite, we found here by TED Talks you did with over 1.4 million views, called Great Leaders Do What Drug Addicts Do. How are you doing today?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing well considering the, let's say, extenuating circumstances here in the jungle of
What?
Costa
I
Rica.
hadn't noticed. What are you talking about, man? Like
Yeah,
I've
exactly.
been
I
locked
can
in my
barely
house for a
tell
month
too.
just out of pure fun.
Yeah, lots of time to internally reflect. I think your idea
True.
of some of the principles you go over of authenticity, and we're gonna, I guess, the new book that you've just written here called "Great Leaders Live Like Drug Addicts Do," a variation of your TED Talks. Can you tell us how we got to some of these kind of ear-catching titles? Bring me through your story.
Yeah, sure. So for me, you know, my everybody always wants to know about my addiction story because we just love watching a train wreck, and so my story as an addict isn't necessarily that different than other addicts. We all have different experiences, but we all reach a bottom. And what we are told in recovery is it's whenever you stop digging. And for me, that was, you know, one day I woke up and I looked at myself in the mirror and I didn't even recognize the human being that was looking back at me. I'd put on 40 pounds. I looked so sad and vacant in my eyes. I was wearing the same clothes every single day. I didn't even have a belt to hold my pants up. I had to use a piece of rope instead. And I was just like, I don't think I can do this anymore. And I asked myself, what am I doing? And one of the things I was doing was trying to get as high as possible because I was addicted to alcohol, addicted to drugs. I'd been kicked out of school. I'd been kicked out of my house. I'd been fired from my job. I'd had my car repossessed. And I decided that I wanted to either A, get as high as possible, higher than I'd ever been, high enough, or B, die trying. And so I started putting more poison in my body in an hour than I'd ever had, than any human being should ever consume. And I didn't die, I didn't OD, but for 5 minutes I felt high enough. But then after that, the obsession started to kick in and I wanted more. And I just started crying. And I was like, dude, I can't even do being a drug addict. This is the hardest. I will still tell people I've done a lot of jobs, but that is the hardest job I've ever done. Hardest job. It's what taught me my work ethic because I was uniquely obsessed with doing whatever it took to be successful at getting high. But that night I was a failure and I was like, dude, I can't do this anymore. So I was like, I'm either going to kill myself or ask for help, and help was offered. And so September 1st, 2002, I woke up at the Betty Ford Center in Rancho Mirage, California, which is a rehab. And that's where my life changed.
You these are such an, it's all, as we started this conversation, I realized maybe let's tell us where you are today then. So that's where you were in 2002, and where's Michael Brody-Waite today? What does your day and your last few years look like?
So today I am someone who had an 8-year career as a corporate executive. I left that career and I co-founded a startup that became an Inc. 500 startup that grew 20,000% in 6 years. I was a CEO of that company. I've now been a CEO 3 times. I left that company when we sold it to a publicly traded company. And I went and ran a nonprofit for 3 years that was the front door to the Nashville entrepreneur ecosystem, where we tripled the number of entrepreneurs that we were serving as a way to give back. But in that journey, I gave the TED Talk. And one of the things I realized in my career was, you know, leaders have a lot in common with drug addicts. So people don't like me saying that, but it's true. So as a drug addict, I will do whatever it takes to get what I want, and I'm uniquely obsessed with doing it. I'll say yes to things I shouldn't. I'll hide my weaknesses. I'll avoid the difficult conversations, and I'll hold back my unique perspective just to be able to get high. And so the difference between me and a leader is a leader will do the same thing, except they're going to pursue success. They're going to hide parts of themselves in order to be successful because that's what they were taught. And they're chasing success. I'm chasing the high. By the way, it does pay a lot better to be a leader than a drug addict. It pays a lot better. But one of the things I noticed was I didn't have a college degree. I was a homeless drug addict, and I had this incredible career and success after success that I didn't feel worthy of because I didn't have an MBA and I didn't have any formal training. And I asked myself after we sold our company, I was like, how the heck did we do all this? Like none of this should have happened. Like I shouldn't be here and we shouldn't be here. And what I realized was everybody talks about wanting authentic leadership in this world, but it's a fantasy. It's not a reality. When was the last time you heard a politician answer a question with, I don't know? Like it just doesn't exist. And so what I realized was being a truly authentic leader, what I call a mask-free leader, not hiding myself behind a mask, was a skill set that I learned in 12-step recovery. And it was a skill set that I built that gave me a leadership philosophy that I then actually took out of the rooms of recovery, and I explicitly deployed them as my leadership philosophy and my business philosophy. And so I ended up using the principles that addicts use to recover to be an entrepreneur and a successful professional, all that stuff. And so today what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to teach everyone the three principles that every addict knows that can actually give them a competitive advantage at work and life.
You know, it's fascinating to hear this dissection of almost a type of obsessive compulsive focus in what we're passionate about. Right now, the high can be overwhelming because it's a neurochemical response that it's induced from an like not an endogenous, it's not, but it's not created normally. Whereas what you're saying is the CEO's drive to do is maybe a similar neurological drive to focus on something and see it all the way through to the end, and even through very abstract circumstances. So do you think that there's a relationship in the chemistry of, let's say, the CEO and the drug addict that are driven for a particular type of focus?
I think that there most likely are some similarities, but I think there are plenty of successful professionals that are able to be successful without being as obsessive as a drug addict. But the thing is that we don't hear a lot about them. And secondly, it's to me the interesting part is it's more about the belief that in order to be successful, you have to hide parts of yourself, that you can't admit your weaknesses, that you can't share your fears and vulnerabilities. Like leaders are not taught that. We're taught how to be a general on a battlefield where you do not question my orders and I'm supposed to have all the answers. And so as an addict, I had to pretend that I was stronger than I was. I had to hide. I was willing to be whoever I needed to be to get what I wanted. Like I did not care. And I feel like a lot of people come into the professional world, see that the leaders are pretending that they're perfect and awesome and not willing to share their own vulnerabilities and weaknesses. And then we think that those are the conditions for success. And so we start to hide parts of ourselves. And up until 25 years ago, that actually did make sense. That playbook made sense. But our world has fundamentally changed in a way that means truly mask-free leaders that are vulnerable and authentic and are able to do some of the things that we thought leaders don't do are actually the ones that are going to gain a competitive advantage.
Okay, so this is a really, I think, important area of discussion. So can you tell me a little bit how, because I'm going to kind of cut my own tongue here and assume that to some degree the road to recovery was what instilled like the discipline and the devotion to what you were passionate about as a transition. Can you tell us a little bit about that time? Because that would probably be one of the most interesting is as you're first discovering these I guess your principles and your
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah. So the three things that every recovering addict knows how to do that most leaders don't is they know how to practice rigorous authenticity, surrender the outcome, and do uncomfortable work. And these are the three principles that I learned in recovery. And I had to apply them right out the gate when I left rehab. And I was in a halfway house and I had 5 business days to get a job. And I was going all over the place applying for jobs, but I had this huge gap in my work history and I had 6 months clean. And I wasn't getting any callbacks. And I finally got a callback from one place called Sam Goody, which for the older people that are listening, it's a record store. For the people that are my age, it's a CD store. For the people that are younger, they have no idea what the F it is. And it's basically brick and mortar Spotify. And They called me, and so when I got off the phone with them, I was like, "Oh my God, I'm going to get a job interview." And I called my sponsor and I said, "What do I tell them when they ask me about this 3 to 4 year gap?" And he said, "Mike, it's really simple. Tell them the truth." I was like, "Tell them the truth. Tell them I was using drugs, and that's why I don't have a work history, and that I just got out of rehab. And if I don't get this job, I'm going to get kicked out of a halfway house." And he was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Dude, if I tell them that I'm not going to get the job, and if I don't get the job, I'm out of the house, I'm on the street, I'm going to start using again, and I know I'll be dead within a year." And he told me, he said, "Mike, this isn't about whether or not you get the job, and it's not about the halfway house. I know plenty of addicts that have stayed clean on the street. This is about whether you're committed to practicing rigorous authenticity, surrendering the outcome, and doing uncomfortable work no matter what. Like, no matter the costs, no matter the stakes, are you willing to do whatever it takes to stay clean?" And I was. So when I went into that job interview and the guy asked me about my work history, I wanted to do what all of us can do. Like, anyone listening, you may not be a drug addict, but we can all relate to the thought that there's something that we think is the worst part about us. And the last place that you want to share that is in the professional world, let alone in a job interview where you think your housing and life are on the line. And yet that's exactly what I did. And by the end of the interview, I thought he was going to judge me and not give me the job. And he said, "When can you start?" And when he said, "When can you start?" I realized that 99% of the worst things that ever happened to us happen only in our head. And that I had this unique set of principles that they do not teach leaders or professionals in any way, that help me lead myself through that moment. And I thought that these principles were just going to help me not put poison in my body. I didn't think that they were going to help me navigate a life situation like a job interview. And then when I went on to corporate America, I realized that I was actually able to use them as a distinct competitive advantage. But it took a little while to figure that out.
Um, so some of these principles were, I mean, I don't know much about rehabilitation, but this sponsor idea, was this a part of the group that you were with as well? Like, were there roots in the group that you were working with? Just
Yeah,
as a
there's
side
more.
question.
No, I think it's a great question, because sometimes I forget some people. Not everybody's supposed to be obsessed with addiction and recovery like I am. Oh, by the way, you're what we call a normie.
I'm a
We call you
normie.
guys. Yes, you're a normie. You
I'm
now have
not
a
a
label.
normie. Look at behind
No,
me
no,
here. There's no
yes, yes.
normie
If
here.
anybody's watching, he's got like a spear gun. He's not a normie, but it means that you are not, like I was, tearing yourself apart to use drugs. So there's a number of different ways for people to recover, but the most predominant way that is the most consistent in its results, which still aren't great, but the most consistent in its results, are 12-step programs. And so I joined a 12-step program, and the fundamentals in a 12-step program is you work the steps, you get a sponsor, and you go to meetings full of people that are working the steps with a sponsor, and that's how you recover. And so I was told that if I didn't get a sponsor, I wouldn't be able to effectively work the steps. And I was told that the steps were the key to me being able not to use. So that's why I got one.
And I know this is another abstract question, but how long had the sponsor been like I guess drug free, or during his
Yeah.
recovery process that kind of took you on as a, because it's like it's like a kind of like a mentor mentee relationship. You hang out on a. I'm just interested to, like,
Yeah.
I don't know the whole process here.
I love you digging into it, because I actually argue in my book that sponsors are the best leaders in the world. And they are better than mentors. They are better than coaches. They are better than CEOs, because what they do is, instead of trying to lead you and everybody else, they just lead themselves, and they use a proven system to do it. And then they share their wins and their losses authentically with the people that they lead. So a sponsor is nothing but a guide through the steps. They can be more, but it's a guide through, like, working these steps. And so my sponsor's name was Chuck, and he had been clean for 15 years. And he had been working in the 12-step program and going to meetings, and been able to not use for 15 straight years. And so when I went to him, he was like, "Okay, I'm going to show you how to stay clean." And a big part of that was working the steps and going to meetings. But another really big part of that was him teaching me how to apply these principles to life on life's terms. And that's where we ended up in the situation where I'm asking him about Sam Goody, and he's not an executive coach, but he's telling me what I need to do to not, like, get high and die. So I'm following his advice.
So Let's kind of jump into the phase where you're building your company. Let's get into some of the changes that you went through here. And I guess as an adjunct to that, did your sponsor, remind me of his name one more time? Sorry, I
Chuck.
apologize. Chuck. Did Chuck end up helping you through the building of some of your business ideas and relationships as well, or was it almost like or were they separate for a lot of the process?
That's a great question. So what I would say is Chuck is no longer my sponsor. He's just my friend. I have a different sponsor because we just became such good friends, and he's like a brother.
Yeah,
Chuck
makes sense.
and a number of other people, they help me do everything I've done. And it may not be explicitly like he didn't help me with the specific idea for my company or the building of it, but he was there for me to call him even when he wasn't my sponsor anymore to ask how can I apply these principles to these business situations. And that's what made me not different, but I was on a little unproven territory. Is a lot of recovering people will take their principles and apply them to life, but they think that they can't do that in the professional world because the power dynamics are set by people that aren't in recovery. And so we think that we have to hide ourselves and basically not practice rigorous authenticity, focus on outcomes, and all that kind of stuff. But he helped me apply the principles to every business situation, and that made him my best advisor, even though he didn't know anything about what I was doing. He was able to give me the advice I needed, which was so crazy. And so for me, I did have advisors that understood the industry that we were in, but my best advisors were the ones that didn't know jack about what I was doing. And they would just say, well, how can you practice rigorous authenticity, surrender the outcome, and do uncomfortable work in this situation? And that always gave me the answer that I needed.
Okay, so we're going through. We've gone from like tearing our skin off, drug addict to quitting cold turkey. Almost it sounds like. Or did the rehabilitation centers? I understand abstract question again. Were they? Did you guys? I obviously going to be personal here, but were there any like drugs that you helped use to come off of it, antidepressants or anything like
Yeah.
this as well, or is it just
Dude,
all cold turkey quitting?
I wrote a book called Great Leaders Live Like Drug Addicts, where I tell my life story. You can ask me anything. I will
Yeah,
share
well, yeah, good.
whatever,
I didn't get
man.
the chance to read it. I apologize. So I'm going to have to ask, I
But I'm
guess.
just saying, I'm kind of putting my stuff out there, so I'm cool with personal questions. I did not need medication to chemically adjust to rehab. Some people, when they're on a specific type of drug, they need to be chemically withdrawn, or if they have just so much alcohol in their system. But good for me or bad for me, I had such a diversity of substances in my system that I didn't have like a tremendous chemical withdrawal from just one. I had a tremendous psychological withdrawal and emotional withdrawal, but I did not have to be chemically withdrawn. So yeah, September 1st, 2002, I woke up and that was my first day not using, and there wasn't anything else in my body to help me, but it helped that I was in a treatment center that was teaching me how to do this.
Yeah, well, a tremendous amount of willpower to make that decision and follow through as well. I think I mean that alone is such a powerful hallmark of that time of your life. Um, so we're going through now. You're out of some of the early stages of the rehab, getting into your process. You're building your company. You've been hired. You start building this company that's addressing a problem in the medical industry, correct?
Yep. Yep.
And you're powering through with the principle of authenticity, showing your weaknesses instead of showing a strength over top of it, like the kind of Lao Tzu, like be weak when others think or like appear weak when you're strong. And anyways, the
Yes.
art of war,
And strong when
sentiment
you're
with
weak.
business,
Yep.
the sentiment of business. But instead you're going around and saying, hey, this is where my weaknesses are. And this is actually where my weaknesses are. So, and you end up closing your first big deal with a company, and I'm pivoting off of your TED Talks here
Yeah.
because of telling them that there was a mistake, and they kind of laugh at you for saying, "We don't even care." Like it's such a small mistake that the contract that you're working on is made. We trust you more now because no one even mentions those things.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what happened in the next 5 to 10 years of business after that moment?
Sure. So I think that moment, we had just signed this big deal, and it was the difference between us running out of money and ending the company and being able to become millions in revenue and go nationwide with our product. We were the first digital self-scheduling platform for healthcare appointments, so patients could make appointments in a mobile device in 30 seconds or less. And it was completely new, which just tells you how backwards the U.S. healthcare industry is. The fact that was new, because I could schedule an appointment for my hair, my cat, and my car, but I couldn't for like my health and my body. It was ridiculous. So, um, so we have this moment where they award us this huge contract. We're on cloud nine, and the next day we find out that our software failed, and nobody knew. And so like I'm sitting there as a founder saying, I've never been the CEO of a startup before. What do I do? And I realized that I don't need to use my business training because I don't have any. I need to use my recovery training to make the decision. And that's when I decided to practice rigorous authenticity, be real about what's going on, surrender the outcome, what might happen with the customer, and do the uncomfortable work of letting them know. And then, as you said, they were like, this was the biggest deal of my life. And they're like, this isn't that big of a deal. What are you talking about? Like, you guys made a very small mistake. Most people don't tell us about bigger mistakes. We love you now. So with what happened with that moment that was really helpful was I got to, more important than winning that huge contract, I got to prove that these three principles give you a competitive edge, because we started beating competitors that had 10 times more resources than we had a competitor that had 150 million venture capital, and we had a credit card. Like, we had my credit card. They had 500 people, we had 50, and we slaughtered them because the way that we interacted with our customers was fundamentally different, and the way that we acted internally, like nobody listening is working in a mask-free culture right now. They aren't working in a culture where you are empowered to say no to the boss, to the customer, to each other, where you can share your weakness proactively. There you go. I know. It's awkward considering how we have actual masks being worn right now, but figurative masks, right? Everybody's working in a culture where they have to hide their weaknesses. I would proactively go to my team and share my weaknesses. And once I hadn't figured out, and that made it safe for them. So we all just grew while everybody else is like hiding their weaknesses. In terms of the difficult conversations, we were able to get to the root of a problem in one meeting instead of 7. And everybody was participating with their unique perspective when it came to innovation and blind spot checking, not just the executives at the top. So that story became fundamental in how I picked employees and how I trained them how we do business, because I would always tell them that story. And then in the interview, I would always ask them, hey, what's your greatest weakness? And they would always give me the bullshit answer of, I work too hard, or I'm too committed to being successful, where they're like spinning it. And then I would come back and I would say, that's a great interview answer. I want to know your worst, greatest weakness as a human being on earth, period. And they pause, and then they say something like, I check social media too much. And I'd be like, okay, I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. This is your last chance. I'm the CEO of this company. We're really successful, right? Well, guess what? The worst thing about me right now is I cannot experience joy. I'm incapable of it right now. When we have success, I can't feel it. And I know that sounds like that's not that bad. It depletes the team around me. It kills morale because I can't celebrate the victories. The people at home feel the pain of that. It's something that I need to work through that I can't spin into strength. Now tell me your greatest weakness. And if they couldn't be real right then in that moment, I didn't care what their resume was. I didn't care what their skill set was. They couldn't work with me because I couldn't trust them to practice those three principles. So we ended up building this incredible company where we had all the largest accounts. No one had an Ivy League, or almost nobody had an Ivy League degree. None of us had done a startup before. We didn't have any investors. We didn't have any connections. We didn't have any patents. We had nothing but these three principles, and we were a best place to work over and over. We were, like I said, acquired by a publicly traded company, Inc. 500 company, like all this stuff. I felt like an imposter all throughout. I'm like, surely my recovery can't be the reason we're successful. This is stupid. Like why don't we know more about this? Like, why aren't recovering addicts all the world over saying these are my competitive advantages? But nobody had really said that. And so we built this incredible company almost by accident, just by trying to do what drug addicts do.
You know, there's a sentiment of this story. It reminds me of two things. One of the, it kind of reminds me of some of the the people that talk about their Army Corps training being really positive in their business sentiments, because there is a type of like underlying camaraderie to be like, hey, this is like, you're going into situations that are potentially more physically harmful on a frequent basis, and you need people to be able to address the reality of what's around you instead of kind of get caught off guard. So there's this I know it's not a direct parallel, but there's this feeling that there's a roughness to life that like the stressors are part of the things that shape strength, and they
Yep.
shape the strengths of who we are. I hear this through so many different areas of sentiment. The kind of the Marine Corps one was just the first, that they're, a discipline or a devotion to something. And then also the embracing, I think, that a lot of people don't normally recognize, is what you brought up in that asking yourself authentically, is most people don't recognize that if they were end up in Nazi Germany, they end up being part of the problem, because complacency is so easily pushed over the edge. I mean, we've seen this through so many scientific studies.
Yep.
Put in a lab coat, ask someone to do something kind of atrocious, and they'll do it. Like, it's
Yep.
just this little bit of authority all of a sudden pushes people
Like the
over the
Stanford
edge.
experiment.
Yeah. So, I guess the if I look at it from a spiritual hallmark, for any of you that have read the book Siddhartha, if you haven't, I recommend it. It's the appreciation that the human that we are, like, what's my greatest weakness? It's like, oh, I'm a human. That's one of my greatest weaknesses. I am all the things that have been evil on this planet, from the worst of it, and also all the benevolent and loving things of it too. We are all all of those things. It just is dependent on focus, and how we share our time, what we invest our lives and our energy into. Essentially, like, it's the same as why you can so easily turn a hatchet from something to build a house with into a malicious
Mm,
tool. It
yeah.
really has so much more to do with the intent and the focus. I guess the question that I have out of that is, when you brought up the idea of, like, okay, I don't get joy from, like, the wins. What was the process of your enjoyment of the journey? Like, what are some of your favorite things about building the business that you celebrated, aside from maybe like closing the big contracts?
For me, it was the feeling of safety that I watched the people on our team experience in being their true selves. Like, one of the things, and this would happen all the time, people in the company would, like, come to me or come to each other with, like, really significant either personal or professional problems, and we would help each other through them in a way that they were scared to share these challenges with even the people in their personal lives. One of the things I used to always tell people that would come to work for us is every company is going to sell you that they're like a family. We're not. You're not coming to a family. You're coming to a place of business that has a mission in the world that is good, but you are trading your time with your family for income and to be able to make a dent in the universe. And I need to respect that by not pretending that this is a family. In a family, you don't get performance managed out of the family. When the revenue for the family is down, your position in that family does not get eliminated. So this is not a family. But what we do here is we practice rigorous authenticity. We surrender the outcome. We do uncomfortable work. We live and lead mask free. And what I found was most of the world and most people's families have trouble being authentic. And so by creating an environment where rigorous authenticity was our competitive advantage and a cultural value, people were able to be their true selves at work in a way that they couldn't out in the real world, which allowed them to bring all of their experiences in life into our work environment. And so conversations at the lunch table could be these incredible sessions where people are, like, bringing real challenges they're going through personally or professionally, and people are really helping by sharing their experience, and they're not judging them. And even today, like, it's really, we talk about this, we think it's really weird. Most of us have left the company because we sold it in 2015. It's been 5 years, and we still have alumni dinners, like reunions, where people will fly in for it. And, like, one of the significant others said, "Don't you think it's odd that you're going to a reunion for a company you used to work for 5 years ago?" And they're like, "Yeah, but something's different." And when I was sitting at the table with everybody, I realized, I've never been around more people all at once in a professional world or outside of recovery that are comfortable being their true selves, comfortable being authentic, not trying to manage perception at all. And the only other place I've experienced that level of safety was in a 12-step meeting. I could go into a meeting in the middle of the hood in a state I'm not even familiar with, where I'm the only white face in the meeting of 50 people in the middle of the hood, and I would feel more safe there because it was my people in recovery than I would at my Fortune 50 job when I was going up the corporate ladder. And so the fact that I was able to create, and we were able to create a space like that in a professional setting, one of the most unlikely settings, is by far the sweetest part of that entire ride.
Awesome. Brilliant. And so I guess that kind of brings us up to where we are today. You've got a new book out. You've been speaking, I guess speaking gigs from the future on looking. It's going to be,
I'm
this
doing
is,
virtual speaking
yeah,
gigs
this is
now.
it now
Yeah.
for all of us. Well, that's exciting. So I'm glad you're on the show. Tell us a little bit about the book, and I guess what you hope to accomplish for yourself, and then for the release of the book as well.
Yeah, thanks. So, Great Leaders Live Like Drug Addicts is really me solving a problem that I saw in the world. So, I was really inspired by thought leaders around authenticity and vulnerability like Brene Brown. I love their work. It was really inspirational. It would tell me the what and the why around being a truly authentic leader, but it didn't tell me how to actually do it. 12-step programs have a step-by-step process that can take anybody with any level of education, any level of cultural background, any level of intelligence, and fundamentally transform who they are. Yet we operate in a world where most leaders don't actually know how to be authentic. And so the gap I saw was people need a step-by-step system to rip the mask off and reclaim their time, reclaim trust, and reclaim their ability to lead themselves. And so in the book, what I do is I take my experience as 17 years in recovery and over 10 years of leadership in retail, corporate, nonprofit, startup, and I lay out a step-by-step program that allows anyone to learn how to live and lead mask-free in just 1 minute a day. It's just by executing a simple, what we call the mask-free minute, that can change everything. And I actually, instead of it being like this book that's like, oh, principles are great, it actually it's a workbook. It actually has them work the steps of these 3 principles I've been talking about, and it allows them to identify which of the 4 masks are the ones that are holding them back the most. The masks are saying yes when you could say no, hiding a weakness, avoiding difficult conversations, and holding back your unique perspective. These 4 masks are holding back every individual, team, and organization in the world, and they happen all the time at work. They cost us 500 hours a year. They cost us growth. They cost us trust. They cost us innovation over and over and over again. And so in this book, they're able to identify which one's holding them back, apply these principles in a very practical, simple, actionable way, and essentially have a mask-free action plan that in 1 minute a day allows them to take the mask off and start to have a completely different life.
I like this idea. I like this idea. I've always thought it was funny for myself. You know, I dropped out of high school in grade 10, in grade 10, and my
Dude, look at
process.
you now, man.
I know.
Let's enjoy
I'm
that
stoked.
win.
I'm stoked. No, I'm stoked. I'm actually, I really appreciate it. But there was a moment when I had bought my first like suit or something, and I actually really appreciate it when I realized that a lot of times they're all masks. So many of these different
Yep.
personality archetypes. You know, people get so heavily invested, not just in what they believe, but also who they believe they are. These stories we tell ourselves about any number of things. You know, there's a lot of trauma associated with that, like you know, the way Gabor Mate's look on psychology here. But some of the things that people carry around, that we've been carrying around for our lives, that we're like ashamed to deal with or work on, etc. This can often be your greatest strengths when we understand that we, like, you know, far along down the road, you're not a victim of these old stories anymore. And a lot of it is just being honest about accepting and embracing who or whatever and how. and then moving forward by being like, okay, well, look, yeah, look what's come of this. So I guess, you know, the look at me now question, I guess, is tell, you still manage a nonprofit that does outreach for
I did.
okay.
So the
That's
Nashville launch, huh?
tell us about this story.
Yeah, so the Nashville Entrepreneur Center was one of the first nonprofits in the country to open up and say, we're going to be the front door for entrepreneurs in our city. And Nashville in the States has had tremendous growth, and so it grew with it. And I was one of the first entrepreneurs that walked through its door back in 2010. I walked through its door in 2010 looking for help building my startup. And so when I sold it and I was looking for a way to give back, they were looking for a new CEO. And so I was the first entrepreneur that was served by that nonprofit to lead that nonprofit. And we spent 3 years going from helping 700 entrepreneurs a year start or grow a business to 2,000, and pioneering a new method for how you build entrepreneurship ecosystems in a city, which is still a very nascent space and a much needed space to be matured. And I did the TED Talk while I was there. And one of the things that I realized while I was doing it was I had spent 3 years running that nonprofit out of service, but I felt like my true purpose was to operate at the intersection of business and leadership and entrepreneurship and addiction recovery. Like that's what my calling was, especially when I did that TED Talk. And so I left that nonprofit. They have another CEO now and doing great. And now full time, I am just I'm coaching and speaking and teaching and putting out mass-free content and letting people know that there is another way to lead. That's what I'm doing now.
Awesome. I really like the stories. You've a bunch of beautiful chapters. To many more beautiful roads and journeys that you'll take there, Michael. I really appreciate your time today. Your stories, your hold on, let's give it a little bit more respect than just saying your story, but your experience and your expression of going, um, let's say from broken to really taking hold of your life and I guess fundamentally chasing like real value. I think a lot of people don't recognize what real value is, but following real value in your purpose and your mission in life, and still
Real
continuing to do
value
that
is in the
today.
transformation of another human that didn't think it was possible. Like
Yeah, the
that's,
caterpillar to butterfly moment.
yeah,
There is that. Yeah, it's so many times the story, we've got these archetypal builds in the way the story portrays itself. There are repeating patterns in the universe, I think, that we often, whether we don't recognize them as intrinsically as they might be related to us, or maybe some that do. Here's a last kind of question for you, Michael. I have you ever taken psychedelics?
um, so do mushrooms count?
Yes. Oh no, 100%. The
Then
psychedelic mushroom
yes,
does fit.
before I got clean, I loved those. Yes.
Oh, but no, it didn't continue on into the next phase of your life. It
Oh
was a
no,
part
man.
of
Since September
recovery.
1st, 2002, I haven't had a cigarette, a drink, or a drug of any kind.
Oh yeah. So here's and this I can well, this is just abstraction here, so bear with me. Um, what's the difference in the chemical influence of a drug for something, say, like cacao, which we know alters your brain chemistry when you drink it in doses, versus something like a coffee, versus something like mushrooms? Where's the like that gray area, do you feel?
So I'm definitely going to put on my non-clinical scientific hat because I don't have
Yeah,
one.
no, of course. This is a
Um,
personal question. This is not
so
no
here,
right
because
answer.
well, and this is actually a big thing that's being talked about right now, like microdosing and stuff in terms of recovery. So people are talking about this stuff. My perspective, and this is what we've always talked about, mind altering, mood changing substances are the ones that addicts are addicted to because our addiction is to be able to predict how we feel. And so, caffeine and nicotine, they are drugs, but they don't fundamentally affect, like, transform your mood and your mind the way a more intense substance like alcohol, marijuana, psychedelics can at full dose, right? So for us, we can, you see a lot of addicts when they get clean, they drink a lot of coffee and smoke a lot of cigarettes because they're just like holding on to the two things they're allowed to do. And they try to have a lot of sex, and they try to like buy a lot of things. But we just need to stay away from anything that's mood altering or mind altering. So at the same time, there's some new stuff happening where people are doing what's called microdosing to try to treat addiction. And I just don't know enough about it personally. I know that for my sponsees, I'm like, man, I personally am not the type of addict where I can mess around with a microdose of anything, like anything that has any potential. Like, I started watching Westworld on HBO, and I can't even use Westworld responsibly. I don't know how I'm going to use a psychedelic responsibly.
Mushrooms has like a, this bar might be too high for most people to ride frequently. It generally keeps people kind of at bay. It's like, ayahuasca, even though there are some people that go back because they don't find, they think that they can find what they're looking for in the experience themselves, instead of understanding that it's a story to help the next like 70 years of hard work that you have in front of
Right.
you for being a human again, right? But
I love mushrooms because they made me not myself.
there's the new evidence that we have around psilocybin, especially in small doses, um, fascinating research, because there's so much. It's like having a computer, right? We look at the computer and we're like, well, there's all these places to plug things in. You're like, and the tryptamine molecule just like fits in there beautifully, like things like DMT, the tryptamine molecule from psilocybin as well. And so you're like, well, it probably is supposed to be plugged in there, right? Like, didn't just make the computer with plugins for no reason. So let's, what are the use cases? And I agree with you. The recreationally speaking, or just for the average person, there's an shouldn't be taken delicately, because they're very powerful hallucinogens, especially in big doses. But in small doses, what you end up finding is most people would never even know they were high. And here's a complete abstraction of the story, but I used to teach bass guitar to a friend of mine, and he was the yacht captain for Crosby, Stills and Nash's boat, and they had docked one day, and his deckhand had worked on boats his whole life, but had almost drowned when he was younger. And he was deathly scared of the water. So the guy would never get in the water, but worked on a boat all the time. He's like, I'm not swimming. I'm safe on the boat. So my friend left a little bit of a jar of like psilocybin mushrooms in honey, small doses. And the deck captain ends up putting a teaspoon of it in his tea or coffee every day while he's out doing the shopping for the boat to like restock everything. And my friend comes back and he finds him. This guy did this jumping around and playing in the water and laughing. And my buddy's like, what happened while I was gone? He's like, I don't know. I had the greatest time while you're gone. No offense to you. He's like, he's like, I love the water again. The what we see from early evidence of the clinical trials, especially in smaller doses, because a part of the problem with medication, and I think any type of dosage, is people attribute the experience to the drug instead of recognizing it's just a different part of who they naturally are already anyways, right? So the fun part about a small dose is you don't attribute a whole lot of the changes that are taking place to this heterogeneous experience. It feels much more endogenous. You relate the change that you've gone through. Like, the guy didn't realize that he had been getting high on mushrooms, so this whole time his relationship with the water had drastically changed, and there was nothing for him to attribute it to but himself. And he was not even, there was not enough of a psychological difference in terms of
Right.
getting high for them to notice that they had taken a substance to begin with. That's how powerful those chemicals are for building these different neurological pathways and like rehashing older communications. So I just wanted to bring that up because it's a fascinating spot to be like, okay, well, where is that gray area for, like, because I know I have an addictive personality too. I used to smoke tobacco, and I would smoke like a chain smoker, but I've never had that with mushrooms. I'm like, okay, just a little, like if I were to take a little is enough, because a lot is like, that's a lot.
See, that's what makes you a normie, man. That guy, like with the tea, I would have just dumped the whole thing in my tea the next day and been like, "Oh man," and then I would have like been on the hunt
Okay,
for more.
okay, so here's the question. How old were you when you were going through your addiction phase?
Probably like 17 to
Yeah.
23.
Much harder years on the mind too. Our frontal cortex isn't even developed till 27. Like we're still dealing with normal, like hierarchical thinking. I like those times are much more difficult to approach properly, especially because some of the, I mean, something like psychedelic mushrooms, you need that frontal cortex kind of kind of doing its thing to get the, like the best bang for your buck out of what the plant can actually do. And when I was younger, I would go full hero dose all the time too. I'd be like, how many mushrooms can I eat? Because at 17 to 23, you're like, I was indestructible, man. Like
Right.
I would imagine you're feeling this, like, oh, let's see how much we can do, like let's get into
Yes.
this. Yeah.
100%. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's faded as I've gotten older, Michael. I
I know. Well, but that's good. You can't stay like that forever because we definitely don't live forever.
Yeah. Thank you for jumping down that last little bit of a rabbit hole for me. I know it had.
No, dude, it was interesting.
Yeah, I thought we'd go there just because it is a as only speculative comment, and I think it's important too that people, ask questions about our ability to, express our freedoms for what we choose to ingest or not, and then be given the freedom to be accepted and embraced for who we are now, instead of who we are when we are making those mistakes or exploring those failures, because failures are what often lead us to our success. Michael, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show today. I'm really excited. Is your book on Audible? Because I'm currently reading a few books already, so I'd have to download it, something I can listen to while I'm gardening right
It
now.
comes out May 26th. And so if you pre-order the book right now at michaelbrody-waite.com or greatleaderbook.com, you get the audio version for free when it does come out.
Okay.
And then it will be on Audible.
Okay, so I'm gonna grab all those links. Be sure to follow Michael on his YouTube channel. He's got a Twitter as well. Probably, judging by the beard, I don't think you have TikTok, Michael. So we'll leave it
No,
at
no,
that.
no TikTok, just Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. I guess that makes me old. I can't believe that those make me old because I'm
It's
not on
okay.
TikTok.
We're old. It's okay,
I know.
Michael. We're old.
It's okay.
I will leave those as many of those links as I can grab down below, ladies and gentlemen. Most importantly, though, have a great day and appreciate all the things you have. And remember all the problems in your life. Be grateful for them, because one day you will not have those either. Stay with the Arcane Bear, another great guest from a beautiful, beautiful story and such a beautiful sentiment. Michael, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks, man. It was awesome.
Ciao.